Good morning, trade professionals. We're back with another episode of the SimplyTrade news roundup. But today is a very special episode. We usually talk on news, and what better way to talk about news than with someone who knows the news best, especially trade news. So we have someone very special on the podcast today, and he is best known as the publisher of the Daily Bugle, the very famous import and export newsletter. So this is no other than Jim Bartlett, but I'm not done yet. Don't worry. There's much more. Can't cover it all because there's a whole book to cover about you, I would say. And you've also written some books. So you are the author of the BITAR, which I actually love that. That's how you would say it, right? BITAR. And another book, which can't say it.
BAFTAR.
BAFTAR.
The annotated ITAR and the annotated foreign trade relations regulations.
Yes, and you're also co-author of the college textbook, The United States Export Controls, which is crazy. I remember my days in college. We had so many college books. Very expensive, I have to say.
And it is very expensive. In fact, I have a copy of it right where. Where is it? It costs. It's not exactly a pocket book. It costs $630. So it's not one that everyone has on their shelf, but they are available.
Yeah, great. Well, that's good. You're also, and this is crazy that this is on my list a little bit lower. You're also a lawyer. That's amazing. His law firm is located in Washington, D.C. and specializes in ITAR and EAR. So that's why he knows what he's doing, I would have to say. You're also a licensed customs broker. I'm telling you, this does not stop. And you're a member of the Commerce Department's Regulations and Procedures Technical Advisory Committee. And also a member of the State Department's Defense Trade Advisory Group. I mean, thank you for being on the show. I'm so grateful. We've had like a marketing relationship for a long time with Global Training Center at the Daily Bugle, because we know we're getting seen by a lot of people in the trade industry with your newsletter. So thank you for coming on. So I'm giving you something to say now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Anik. It's a pleasure to be on with you and Lalo. Even though Lalo's not here at the moment, I understand he had a client matter that he had to attend to right away, and I understand those. I did want to mention on the, you said I am a customs broker, and I want to remind people that the next exam for customs broker exam is May 1st. That registration is closed, however. So if you're not already registered, you can't register for that. But the following one is in October. And I recommend that anyone who is not a customs broker but works in the trade industry to consider taking the broker's exam. It costs $300, but if you pass, it's money well spent. It is the only requirements are that you be over 18 years of age and an American citizen. Oh, and you have to be of good moral character. You might say, well, how do they check that? Well, there is one famous case of a woman who passed the exam, but in the moral character examination, they found out that she was the daughter of a mafia don, and that kept her out of the license. They actually said, no, she has too many connections with the underworld, so they kept her from being. But anyway, I doubt if any of your listeners would fall in that category. But I highly recommend the taking the exam. Now, I might say that when I took the exam, I thought, well, the only requirements are that you be over 18, pay your $300. My company paid that. And it's an open book exam. So I thought, well, how easy is that? Because I passed 4 bar exams, no problem. So it should be a snap to pass an open book exam. So I'm flipping my HTS and my regs and all back and forth, and time is up. I was only halfway through. I flunked. So I was quite surprised and embarrassed. So I said, this is one you have to study for. So after I flunked, I decided, well, I got to get serious, went and took one of these courses. And then passed. And I recommend it very highly, even if you don't plan to do customs brokering events, even if you're not going to enter items where you have to have a license. It's great to hang on the wall. It's great for your resume because people think if you have a customs broker's license, you know everything about customs. Well, that's just not true. It's like having a law degree. You don't know everything about law. I don't practice tax law, marriage and family and all that. My practice is very limited. In fact, you mentioned I have an ITAR and EAR compliance practice. It's actually not a compliance practice. It's a non-compliance practice. Almost all of my clients are in trouble, serious trouble, and they need help dealing with the government, getting them out of trouble. But if you are a customs broker, you have a world of new jobs available to you. And I recommend it very highly that you take that exam. Next.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that because we do have a licensed customs broker course that we offer with a third party that we offer on our page, and people see a really good success rate. It is, not something that you spend $5 on, but it is very worth it. Like you have said, you will get your money's worth afterwards.
So say that it's, as I found out personally, it's practically impossible to pass this exam without a course in which somebody knows what you study and what you can ignore. The pass rate is very low. It was 7% when I finally passed. Currently, it's been running about 15% pass rate. And it's very difficult. I asked one of the writers of that exam, in a customs lawyers meeting in Washington, why it is so difficult, more difficult than bar exams. And that's because she said, you don't have to have a law degree to take the exam. So, you just walk in, sit down with your books and take it. But when you become a customs broker, you're usually paid by the entry in many brokerages, and you want to do them fast. And when you're doing them fast, you tend to not look everything up, and a lot of it's from memory. So we want to make sure that you know how to look things up quickly and what to memorize and what not to memorize. Is it 5 days, business days, or is it 5 calendar days? Questions like that come up, and you have to really know those. You don't have time to look everything up. A lot of it you just have to memorize. And a good course instructor will tell you, memorize this, just put tabs in your materials for that. And nowadays you can use your computer as well. And there are some remote sites that you're allowed to go to where they're all over the United States. But I do recommend that. So.
Wow. Well, that's very good to know. Thank you. So I want to go into the Daily Bugle a little bit more because, I'm sure a lot of you guys follow the Daily Bugle. Are subscribed to the Daily Bugle. So you would get their emails daily, as in Daily Bugle. But let's discuss a little bit more what this newsletter entails, just because people might think, oh, it's a newsletter, I'm just getting the news. No, you're not just getting news that are happening, every day in the trade industry. You're getting resources that can help you succeed in your day-to-day, business life. So first off, let's talk on, the import and export laws and regulations. You share those in the newsletter, right? Like if there's any updates.
Yes. Every day I read the Federal Register. The Federal Register is thousands of pages, but those of us who are in the import and export trade really are only interested in certain websites, certain laws and regulations. And those are any change to the Export Administration Regulations, Commerce, EAR, any change to the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, State Department's ITAR, is, of course, important, because if the law changes today and tomorrow you violate it, you're responsible, even though you didn't know it changed. As the old saying goes, ignorance of the law is no excuse. It is your responsibility to go in and read the Federal Register every day or subscribe to a newsletter where somebody else does it for you. And that's what I do. There are quite a few out there, newsletters. One of my main competitors is another newsletter that comes out every day, but they charge over $2,000 a year for that newsletter. Mine is free. You can't find a better deal than free.
That's very true. And you know what? I love that you said that, that you are responsible for knowing these kind of changes. I always ask when we have certain news episodes, I always ask, this is a huge change in the industry. What if someone doesn't keep up with the news and they work as a compliance and they think they're just compliant as of right now? As of today, they're compliant. But as of tomorrow, are they really compliant? Or when this law changes, are they going to be compliant? And who's going to tell them? So, because there's so many law changes, who is responsible for if a law changes and you're not complying?
Well, most companies have a director of trade that will keep up to date and send that information out to their employees, but you're responsible for what you do yourself. You just can't blame it on nobody told me. Now, most of the major changes in the ITAR, EAR, and customs regs and sanctions and so forth are announced in advance as a proposed regulation change. So there will be a proposed regulation change come out in the Federal Register, which will be in the Daily Bugle, and it will tell you that, say, 6 months from now, the ITAR, the EAR, or customs regs will change. That gives you a chance and your company to prepare for it. And there is a lot of room for a specialist to get involved with the contracts people, the ordering the people, to do a little customs planning. So you can say, well, customs regs are going to change 6 months from now. We need to decide maybe we ought to buy it in the United States rather than overseas because it's going to cost too much. So that gives you some planning opportunities to do. And that's why you need to know every day what's in the Federal Register. Now, I also check about 10 different government websites. I check the Customs and Border Protection, CBP. I check the Commerce, BIS site, Bureau of Industry and Security. I check the State Department, DDTC, that's Defense Trade Controls. And I also check EU, UK, Australia, just to see if there are any major changes that might be made. One time, the director of enforcement at State Department was talking about how he goes around in an audit and checks with people and says, how do you keep up with changes in the news? And when he hears, oh, I subscribe to the Daily Bugle, he says, okay, you're good. I'm happy with that because now I know that you'll be up to date on what the changes are.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, there's so many newsletters out there, but it's just as important to know where you're getting the stuff from that is in the newsletter.
And a lot of the newsletters are from law firms, and they put in their own commentary, very good commentaries on a new law or a major case. Somebody was fined $50 million and you want to know why and how you can avoid that sort of problem in your own company. But they only feature their own commentary. And what I do is I look at a lot of these newsletters, and they send me copies of their commentary, and I put those in the Daily Bugle as well. So I have right at the top of the Bugle is the law, the regulations, and a website check. And then I go to news, and I'll feature newspaper stories, magazine stories, and so forth. So-and-so was fined 50 million yesterday, or so-and-so was put into jail. And then I go to the commentary section. And in the commentary section, I feature comments by law firms. Now, some of them are very long, so I just give you the top 2 or 3 paragraphs of their advice. And if you like it, then you click on the link. There is always a link to sources in all of my stories, whether they're news articles or federal government articles. You can always click on them and see where it came from and go to the original so you can get the full registration, the full information.
Yeah, and not only do you do that, right? You also list jobs, correct?
Oh, that's right. Down near the bottom, I have coming events like GTC training, for example, and we will advertise valuable training events for you to attend. And we also have a list of jobs. Now, I have sometimes up to 100 job openings listed. And I've got a couple from a recent Daily Bugle. There are all sorts of jobs. For example, Northrop Grumman just sent me one for a trade compliance manager out in Redondo Beach. Salary range is $150,000 to $225,000. Of course, that requires a lot of experience. But there are others that are on the lower end. Amazon, for example, in Boston, going from 100K to 143K, 3 years experience required. Some of them don't even require a college degree. There's one here, Derringer, for example. They have 3 advertisements, all remote, so you can do these from home. Import specialist, 2 years experience, high school diploma is the only educational requirement. So these are not all high-end jobs. Some of them are universities. Cal Poly just in San Luis Obispo just sent me a job offer, not for me an offer, to post in the Daily Bugle. And this is from 100K to 120K. And this requires a 4-year degree or equivalent experience. So even at a university, you don't have to have the college degree if you have the experience. And then there are some for consultants, like ECS, Export Compliance Solutions. They're looking for a software sales representative who knows something about ITAR and EAR, but is actually going to be out there selling sanctions software. So I would encourage anybody who is either looking for a job or has a job to click into my website, which is bartlettpublications.com. And you will see how to advertise your job. And if you just read the Bugle, you'll see what jobs are available. And you should always be thinking.
They can also subscribe the Daily Bugle on your website, correct?
Oh, yes. If you're not a subscriber, then you can go to bartlettpublications.com, and there's a subscription right there. When I lecture at SIA or one of the other major lectures, there might be 600 people in the room. I'll say, how many of you subscribe to the Bugle? And probably 2/3 of the audience will raise their hand. And I'll say, those of you who did not raise your hand, ask someone who did raise their hand why they subscribe to the Daily Bugle. And the next day they subscribe.
Well, I bet it's a must, right? If you're in the industry, it's a must. So I want to go into the Federal Register a little bit because there's a recent item. And so invitation seeking applicants for a membership in each of the 6 technical advisory committees. So, Jim, I have to say, I don't know much about it just because I am very much on the marketing spectrum of trade. But I want you to talk a little bit about this because we want to give our listeners something that they can take away and maybe an action they can take. So can you tell us anything about this membership? Because I know you are a member. And
Absolutely.
How does this membership benefit these people? How could it benefit our listeners? Or how does it benefit you?
A week ago, there was an announcement in the Federal Register, which comes only once every 2 years. And that is the Commerce Department is accepting applications for membership in the technical advisory committees in the Commerce Department. They have 6 technical advisory committees that are called TACs. I'm a member of the Regulations and Policy Technical Advisory Committee. They have 6 different committees, and they cover mostly sections in the EAR in which people from industry and from law firms and from institutions are invited to come in and sit in a room, once every 3 months their quarterly meetings and meet with the persons who actually write the regulations for the ITAR and the EAR. We interview the undersecretaries and high-level individuals. It's an excellent opportunity for you to get inside that organization, inside that institution, and talk to other people. There are usually 30 to 40 members. They're all generally high level, and only one person from each company is allowed to be a member. I've been a member for quite a few years. It's a fabulous opportunity to find out what's happening before it happens. They will actually, in the Commerce Department, for example, we are given privately, not for distribution, draft copies of the next change to the law and asked to comment on it. Is this going to work for companies? Is this going to be too difficult? And so forth. And the regulators will ask us how we feel about it. So they work with us. Now, in the Defense Trade Advisory Group, which is the equivalent technical advisory committee in the State Department, we actually get projects to work on. One of the projects that I was a chair of was they asked, what are the top 10 words that are not defined in the ITAR, but you would like to have them defined? So we came up with about 50 that were either not defined or they were poorly defined. And then we put them on PowerPoint slides and we presented it to the State Department, to the DDTC. Now, these meetings are open, by the way. The one that is coming up, let's see, the next one for Commerce Department RAPTAC is on the 30th of this month. So that's April 30th. They're always on a Tuesday. You can tune in. They have a public session where everyone can listen. And then they have a private session where they turn off the cameras, and those of us who are in the room or sometimes participate by Zoom can discuss the issues that are not for public release. Now, the only requirement for it is that you must be well experienced in your area. You must also have a security clearance, or they will get a security clearance for you. So you have to be a U.S. citizen because you will be required to have a security. I encourage everyone who believes they are qualified to apply. It doesn't cost anything, and it looks excellent on your resume if you're looking for a better job or a promotion, and you will personally benefit from it. So I recommend it to everyone. The meetings usually take place in Washington, D.C., but if you live a long ways away, there are often hookups for a Zoom or a Teams meeting.
Nice. Okay. Well, this is
by
great
the way,
to know.
I was going to mention one time I had a client who was in serious trouble with the Commerce Department and had not heard anything, had submitted a voluntary self-disclosure, had not heard anything, and was really worried and was asking me, could I go to jail for this and so forth. So after the director of the Office of Export Enforcement, OEE, finished making his presentation to us, we said, thank you very much, gave him a round of applause, and then he stepped outside. I jumped up from my seat, went outside and said, wait, I have a client, and I named the company, who's being investigated. They haven't heard anything in a long time. And the director said, Jim, tell them not to worry. We consider this a low-level matter. What you have already submitted is adequate. Tell them not to worry about it. You'll hear from us in a couple of weeks. Well, that was very valuable information for that individual. And that's the kind of information that you can get. And also they know who you are. If you're a member of RAPTAC or DTAG and you call their office and leave a message, you'll get a call back. Not just like somebody from they never heard of before. So anyway, that's another reason why I encourage everyone to apply. And if you want to know how to apply, if you go back to last Friday, I believe it was, the announcement, you can get the instructions there in how to apply.
And thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And I have a question for you. It is on the BIS conference, the Bureau of Industry and Security. conference? Because I know you attend, correct?
Right. I go more every year.
So I have to ask, it was last month. And can you share your experience? And what is it like?
To begin with, all conferences have some value, although you might not be able to afford them. But when I teach at conferences, or sometimes I just go, even if it's an intro to ITAR, and of course, that's how I make my living, and I teach it myself, I would say I have never been to a conference where I haven't learned something new or learned that something I thought was the rule is changed or I was incorrect. But one of the main reasons I like to go to these conferences is to meet people. You meet the other people who are important in your area, friends that you'll develop there that you'll know for the rest of your life, your professional life. And one of the main advantages of a conference is getting to meet the regulators. So even if you're not on a TAC like RABTAC or DTAG, and you're not being able to shake hands with these regulators, you can meet them there. They make speeches from the dais and then they go to lunch and whatnot. You can actually meet them. And that's what I enjoy doing, shaking hands, giving a business card. They probably throw it in the trash afterwards. But nevertheless, you might be able to meet people that are going to do you some good and your company some good later. So I encourage you to go to these. Now, the BIS, that Bureau of Industry and Security annual update, is probably the largest of all of these. They had over 1,000 people at this one that met in Washington a couple of weeks ago, and they maxed out. So if you didn't register early, you weren't able to go. And it was gigantic. One of the good things about it is, in addition to the speeches from the podium, you break out into roundtables on the next day or the day afterwards. And you can go in and just discuss, for example, one particular exemption in the ITAR. Oh, and by the way, the State Department sends people too to the Commerce Department conference. So you get to meet the State Department, ITAR regulators, as well as the Commerce Department regulators. And then on the last day, they'll have about 20 tables, and each one has a sign on it that will say something like sanctions, or voluntary disclosures. And you can sit down there and talk to the people who actually receive a voluntary self-disclosure, as they call it in the EAR, or voluntary disclosure, as they call it in the ITAR. In fact, why they call it a voluntary self-disclosure in the EAR, I don't know, because how could it be a voluntary disclosure if you didn't do it yourself? if somebody else rats you out, then you will. It will not be a voluntary disclosure because they've already got the information. One word about that: the customs regulators, customs regulations reward snitches. That is, you can get a reward of up to 1/3, I believe it is. It used to be a limit of $25,000. I'm not sure what it is today. It's probably higher. But you can get a reward for turning someone else in. So once in a while,
Wow.
A client will call me and say, Jim, you told me I couldn't put this sort of thing out at the conference, or that I had to have a TAA in order to train these foreign pilots. But there's another company out there right now doing it, and I know they don't have a TAA. Should I turn them in? I said, well, absolutely. Because if you have to obey the rules, why should somebody else take away your potential customers and not obey the rules? So you can turn them in by notifying one of the law enforcement agencies, and that will be investigated anonymously. Now, if you want your reward because it's a customs violation, then you don't want it to be anonymous. You want to tell them who you are.
I was going to say.
You can get the reward. Yes.
Wow.
That is one of the benefits of going to these conferences is you get the latest information. You're able to meet with the regulators, ask questions. You're able to stand up in the meeting and put a question to them. And you can't do that in ordinary circumstances.
So you're on RepTac. Am I
yes,
saying
I'm
this right?
on the RepTac, which is the one of the six
Committees.
TACs at
Okay.
Commerce Department.
Okay, so what do they generally do? Can you explain it? Can you go in a little bit
Oh, yes.
into that?
Well, once a quarter we meet and we sit there, and in come the regulators, and they come and they tell us what they're up to. They say the first one you usually get is from Sharon Cook. She'll tell us what regulations are about to come out. Or sometimes we're asked, do we need a regulation in this area? And sometimes we're given copies of the proposed regulations before they're printed in the Federal Register just to comment on. Sometimes people tell me, well, Jim, you always pick out all the errors we print. So instead of picking them out after they're published, why don't you tell us about them right now? In fact, by the way, speaking of errors, I send Commerce and State Department a list of the errors that are in their regulations.
No way.
So that they can correct them. Yeah, in the Bartlett's annotated ITAR, the reason that I can sell this is because it contains over 1,000 footnotes. Each section, I show what the history was, cases, and I also point out the errors. I mean, here are a few of them. In the ITAR, I have a list of 99 errors. Most of them are just misspellings. And I mean, for a while, the United States was spelled SATES, And when I confronted the director with this and said, why didn't you change that? They said, well, everybody knows how to spell states. We'll change it the next time we have a substantive correction on that page, because it costs a lot of money to make a change. But for example, 125.4 of the ITAR refers to the Office of Freedom of Information and Security Review. Well, that was changed 9 years ago in 2014 to the Defense Office of Publication and Security Review. And it's still the wrong one in the ITAR, even though the ITAR is amended about 6 times every year. And 124.14 regarding a warehouse distribution agreement says, see 126.10b in parentheses. Well, 126.10b was removed 2 years ago, and it's still referred to that. So when you see that and you say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. You drop down to my footnote and it says that was moved to 120.21. Okay. The ITAR still refers to the Defense Security Service, DSS. Well, Defense Security Service changed their name 5 years ago to Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. It's still wrong in the ITAR. So don't take what you read in the ITAR or the EAR as the gospel, because it may be incorrect. And,
well, that's not very good, I have to say.
No, but they're busy people, I guess. So I keep sending them.
But you're busy too, so it surprises me that you are the one to find this, because I feel like your work never stops. But
go ahead.
I'm so thankful to have talked on all these important issues and resources, because truly that is what news really are about, is to gain resources that can help our listeners further specifically. And I want to let people know that they can subscribe to either your books or the Daily Bugle by going to your website, which is www.bartlettpublications.com. I want to close this session out by, again, thanking you so much for sharing your knowledge with us, which is a very great knowledge. But we always end with a fun fact. And I know we didn't mention this earlier, but the Daily Bugle also shares the Friday funnies, right?
Mm-hmm. And every day I have what I call Bartlett's unfamiliar quotations, because there is a book for many years, Bartlett's Familiar Quotation. Well, I go through Brenny quotes and other sources every day and pick out somebody born on this date that is older the better. I like to go way back and give some quotations, some thoughtful quotations. And then on Friday, I usually try to include some Friday funnies.
For the weekend.
Yeah. Last Friday, I I quoted some from a book called Disorder in American Courts. This was written by court reporters, and they put in some of the funny things that they had to sit there and listen to and try not to laugh when they're recording it. I have a few of those here. For example, the attorney's question: all your responses must be oral, okay? What school did you go to? Witness: oral. Apparently the witness had been making some signs or something. Attorney: what is your date of birth? Witness: July 18th. Attorney: what year? Witness: every year. Now, here's one that said...
That's a good one.
Attorney: is your appearance here this morning pursuant to the deposition I sent to your attorney? Witness: no, this is how I dress every day when I go to work. Your appearance, obviously. Attorney: doctor, how many of your autopsies have you performed on dead people? Witness: doctor: all of them. The live ones put up too much fight. Here's kind of a long one. This is the last one I'll mention. But sometimes we lawyers ask some stupid questions. Attorney: doctor, before you performed that autopsy, did you check for a pulse? Doctor: no. Attorney: did you check for blood pressure? Doctor: no. Did you check for breathing? Doctor: no. Attorney: so then, is it possible the patient was alive when you began that autopsy? Doctor: no. Attorney: how can you be so sure, doctor? Witness: because his brain was sitting on my desk in a jar. It's not over. Attorney: I see, but could the patient have still been alive nevertheless? Witness: yes, it is possible he could have been alive and practicing law. So witnesses sometimes have to put up with stupid questions, and that's just, I look for things like that. So if my readers have anything funny they like to see put in the Friday Funnies, then you can just send me an email.
I love that. No, that the last one was funny. And yeah, I feel like sometimes I'm very fascinated by lawyers, to be honest, just because I watch Netflix shows, really. The Netflix shows, which show did I watch? It was something about it was the Lincoln Lawyer. Very interesting, but they had a lot of the cases, and they were most
TV law programs are terrible when it comes to the requirements. I might mention that a few years ago, the American Bar Association had a nomination for the top 25 law motion pictures that most closely follow the rules that are followed in the courtroom. And you know what the number one was, and I recommend everybody watch it, is My Cousin Vinny. It's a comedy, but it was written by a lawyer, and it's about two kids who get accused of murder in an Alabama court. And the way they go about it is hilarious, but the rules that are followed in court are very accurate. And it's even used by some in law schools by the trial tactics professors to say, watch this movie and you will see some of the rules that we have told you about. Not asking a question of a witness unless you know what they're going to answer, just all sorts of things. So I recommend that's one of the good ones is
My Cousin Vinny. Okay, I'll note that down, and you should too as a listener. So that concludes our episode for this Monday, and I know it was different, but I have to say it was different on a very positive side.
Can I add one thing, Annick?
Yes,
and that
of
is
course.
Anyone who wants to send something to me based on this conversation, who wants to communicate with me or send me some jokes for Friday Funnies, my email address is very simple: jebartlett@jebartlett.com.
There you go. That cannot be missed. And you know what? On this episode, they can always rewind to get it right if they misspell it. So thank you again for listening, and follow us on all social medias. We have LinkedIn. We're on YouTube. We share all the trade gems on YouTube, and all channels as known. And that will be it. We will see you next Monday. Can't wait with our regular scheduled episode. And for now, that's it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for joining us. SimplyTrade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor SimplyTrade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at SimplyTradePod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. SimplyTrade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by SimplyTrade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.